This is the ISG Digital Dish.
Welcome to the Digital Dish,
a podcast for women's voices and perspectives in the digital world. I'm Lois.
I'm Missy.
And I'm Jeannie. And we want to make sure smart women and their points of view were being heard. Hey Lois.
Hey Jeannie, how are you?
I'm good. Usually we do a little intro with the person who did not do the intro, but Missy is not feeling well and says she's croaking like a frog. So we'll catch her on the outro.
Well, and I'm excited because, this is, I don't know if you've actually taken note of this, but this is the first time I actually did an interview myself.
Yep.
And I was really excited because of these two fantastic women who I knew would have so much to offer in regards to being your authentic self. So I'm really looking forward to this interview and being able to share it with others.
Yeah. So tell us how you met them, Lois. I know we had a big event and I wanted to share with everybody what we did, how we found Sarah and Isabelle.
Yes, well, actually, I've known Isabelle for a number of years. Isabelle and I met, probably over 5 years ago, and we were at an event in Florida, and I talked a little bit about women in digital. That's just when we were starting our program here.
Okay.
And so she had been an advocate, really a lifelong advocate, and ran the Women in Digital program at Capgemini. And so she just really helped us out. Myself, Kathy Rudy, another member of our firm, we went to some Capgemini events. She helped us. We were even thinking about doing our own event. So I've known her for a number of years. And when we were doing our first annual Women in Digital Awards here at ISG, I thought of no one else could have done the job except for Isabelle to be our guest speaker. And she did that. And so she had a fantastic message and, was just really upbeat and helped us really think about how important it is to give recognition to women.
I remember her during that awards presentation, and I just thought, wow, she's really great. She's interesting. She's got a lot to say. Turns out, I think that's true when we hear the interview. So her and then Sarah, and tell us about Sarah.
Yeah, so Sarah was one of the winners of the categories for our Women in Digital, our 2022 Women in Digital Awards as a rock star leader.
Oh, cool.
And so she just really was impressive. All the things that she did in her career, continues to do in her career. And she actually chatted a bit in her, acceptance of the award about key things that she did and how she really thought about herself and how when she changed how she thought about herself is when her career really took off. So I thought, gosh, she would have a great, and I really wanted to get those two together.
Yeah.
Get Isabelle and Sarah just chatting, and I knew it was going to turn into something great.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, and I hope everyone else is. So everybody enjoy the interview, being your authentic self, and we'll talk to you after the interview.
All right, so today I'm excited to have a couple of guests with me to talk about being your authentic self. And, this is a topic that when you say authentic self, it's not really about being honest, authentic. It's about really being yourself. Where, I might get a new job, a new role at work, and I see who had that role before me, and I think, I don't know if I can be as good or see how they used to do that role. How am I going to do that? And I feel a little bit intimidated and a little bit not sure of myself, but I don't know if I was thinking about it the right way. And we're going to have a chat about being your authentic self. So first, I'm going to ask Sarah, could you introduce yourself?
You bet. Thank you, Lois. It's great to be here. I'm Sarah Urbanowicz. I'm the Chief Information Officer at AECOM. I have been with AECOM for about 5 years now. And prior to being the CIO here, I was the Chief Information Security Officer. So I've actually spent most of my career in and around cyber prior to my role as CIO. So worked in oil and gas for many years before I came to AECOM and did a stint with a large tech company before that. So really, really happy to be here. Very excited for the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And also Isabelle, all the way from, I think, Paris today. Isabelle?
Yes, thank you, Lois. So I'm Isabelle Roux-Chenu. I am an attorney by training. I've practiced law in the States, in the shipping industry for a couple of years, a very masculine environment, then switched to an American law firm in Paris and Brussels for 15 years as an attorney in a very masculine environment again, doing mergers and acquisitions and all kinds of litigation. And last but not least, I was the group general counsel for Capgemini, a large multinational in IT, where I held the job for 19 years, after which I switched reporting into the CEO as the person in charge of commercial and contract management and the one heading gender balance. I created a program that I believe transformed the organization, and I held that position on top of my day job for a decade. And I have retired last year, although I don't feel like a retiree, and I'm very, very active. Part of what I do is podcast like today, and I'm very, very excited because I think the topic of authenticity is a very important one, in particular for women, and we'll see why I say that.
Well, that's great. And I appreciate you both being here. And I guess, what probably initiated or kind of got us talking about this topic and wanting to put this podcast together. We were just talking with Sarah and Isabelle for one of our Women in Digital, our awards program. And Sarah was one of our award winners. She is the Rockstar Leader for 2022. So congratulations on that. And what struck me is when you gave your acceptance speech, telling a little bit about yourself when you received that award, you made a mention about the concept of it was something that you recognized when you were realizing how to be yourself is when your career really started to rise. And I thought that was such an interesting topic. And I was just wondering, how did that happen? Were you being reflective? Like, what caused you to think about that at some point in your career?
I wouldn't say I had an aha moment. Let me just say I have lots of those, I think. And in this case, it wasn't a sort of waking in the middle of the night or a jarring moment for me. It was really a longer, tougher journey, to be honest, more like sort of a nagging conflict or struggle, maybe just below the surface. I'm making it sound very dramatic. But I think that sort of over time caused me to be tired and restless throughout my career in hindsight. Those were at least my primary symptoms, if you will. I'm sure it's different for everyone. But the reason I said it was important to my career rise specifically is because I think I had held myself back, not on purpose, obviously, because I didn't believe I could operate at the next level unless I emulated the people I saw in those leadership positions. So I acted like what I saw, which for me personally often meant being more stoic than I am naturally, not letting myself get too comfortable or trying not to with other people at work in the way of personal relationships and friendships, and really never showing vulnerability or weakness. That was a big one. I didn't see that happening maybe in a lot of male leaders, and so I just assumed that I needed to behave in that same way, which again for me personally was inauthentic. And what I found was I can behave in those ways. I'm perfectly capable of behaving in those ways, but I didn't perform at nearly the same level or have the same results with my teams when I did. And my personal opinion, we all have a limited amount of energy we can expend as human beings. And when you're acting in a way that's not authentic, it takes up a ton of energy, which means you have less energy to expend on things that are your natural superpowers, as I like to call them. So I think my reflection is probably more in hindsight. I think I got tired. of pretending and acting, and maybe that let my guard down a little bit. And lo and behold, I sort of discovered things really kind of took off for me when I became my authentic self at work, at home, and everywhere in between.
Yeah, I think I had a very similar scenario too. Like I mentioned, I was asked to be the sales leader of our organization, and I was replacing someone who was a natural salesperson, someone who was male who, did a great job. And I thought, how am I going to be that person? Because I just didn't see that in myself. But the same way I realized, well, wait a minute, I have different skills, right? I have skills of really helping the teams come together and to figure out how they can be their best people. And, that was actually the trait, I think, even as, the executive who put me in that role probably thought, well, we need a different skill set. And sometimes that's, what's really needed to be effective in your job.
Indeed. Indeed.
So, I guess, Isabelle, I think one of the things that I'm puzzled with is, why do we feel as women, what's almost causing this? And I was actually doing a little bit of research on this, and I found something that Mary Barra, who's the CEO of General Motors, the first woman CEO, by the way, of General Motors. And when she first started that role, she looked at their 10-page dress code and thought, we can do this better. And she simply replaced it with the words dress appropriately. Now, that I thought was a pretty interesting way and a subtle way of saying, don't necessarily have to adhere to this very stoic and probably expectation of dress. Just dress what you believe is the right way. And it's kind of like this, permission that she gave a little bit to people in her organization to, kind of think about yourself. But what is it in women that we feel like we need to emulate others?
Well, first of all, I very much associate with what Sarah said. Women are perfectionists. They always think that they are not at the top, and that provokes a number of reactions. First off, I have seen more women than men. In fact, I've never seen a man refuse a promotion. I've seen many women refuse a promotion because they felt it's not the right timing. I just had a child. I'm not ready for it. I have to support my family, this and that. As far as men are concerned, I recall very vividly the CEO of HP in France saying, every man that comes to my office to whom I offer a job says, I'm your man. And then they walk out of my office and they try to figure out how they will reach that level. Women hesitate. He said, I had so many women refuse jobs. I had to caucus with them, to comfort them and say, you're capable. So women want to tick the box and be 100% or 95%. Otherwise, they cannot take the job. And that's because we are perfectionists. There is a link between that somehow and the fact that we are in lack of self-confidence. Of course, I don't like to generalize because you are women that are born with self-confidence. But I think we are raised, at least in my generation and yours, maybe not in the walk generation, but that as a girl, you have to smile, you have to be nice, you have to be soft. And as a boy, you have to be strong. You have to be the head. You have to be competitive. You don't cry. So these are the kind of things. So we are predisposed to already a number of stereotypes that are not leading to create an environment where we stand on our feet and say to ourselves, yes, I can do it. So this creates an environment, and this creates a norm. Now, I think you had a question about what is a norm and if the norms are traditions that we keep. And I reflected on the questions of norms because, first of all, norms are not universals. And most of us in today's world are exposed to an international career. And in an international environment, you are meeting very different norms, culturally, ethnically, religiously, whatever. And that leads on authenticity to create a problematic which I've been thinking of. And I reflect as a French woman born in the south of France and being raised by parents who really fostered being authentic. And that meant say what you think, regardless of the environment, maybe. And that can lead to being a bit blunt or not politically correct. So when I'm in France and when I interface with French people, it's no problem. When I interface with Dutch people, it's even less of a problem because they are very blunt, even more than me. But when I started interfacing with British people or Indians. And I realized that 10 years after having traveled 3-4 times a year in India, Indians are like the British. When you say maybe, you mean no. And when you say yes, you mean yes or possibly maybe. As a French person, when I say yes, I mean yes. When I say maybe, I mean maybe and possibly yes. And when I say no, I say no. So if you are authentic, you don't change the way you are and the way you behave, save for some politically correct things. But if you consider that in your culture, when someone proposes or asks you to do something professionally and you say no, and this is considered really rude and is creating a barrier, you know that norms are not universal. They depend on the environment. And if you travel, it's like a snail. You come with your environment on your back and you don't necessarily change behavior. And when I am the way I am, when I am in the UK or in India, if I have to tone down very much, it's more than just being polite for me. It's being different from the authenticity that I thought I was raised and used to deploy across the board. So I think the norms are a very important thing. Also, the environment, I wanted to say something a minute on it. The environment evolves depending who is around yourself. I don't believe women that are not really mature will behave the same if they are only in an environment of women, if they are in an environment with women and men, and if they are with men only, including myself. And I am retired and I have been a top executive in roles reporting to the CEO, having a career. Because I think when you are between your own gender, or if there is a balance between men and women, you allow yourself to be more of what you are, and therefore you're closer to authenticity. When you are in a minority, which in my career, I have been exposed to in the shipping industry in the 80s in New York, where I was the only woman, in M&A in American law firms, where I was often the only woman. And when I joined Capgemini and at executive committee level or in high-level COMEX of different sorts, I was a lot of times alone or with 1 or 2 women. You don't behave the same. And in fact, I reflected on something I knew. There are statistics about women in boards. A woman in a board alone almost changes nothing. 2 or 3 women in a board improve the performance of the company maybe by 10%. I didn't go back to the statistics, but I know because I've done gender balance issues in a corporation for a decade. And if you have an equal number of men and women in a board, you maximize absolutely the performance, which means that as an individual, even if you have self-confidence, if you are placed in an environment where there is a dominance of a gender that is not yours, you are likely to be inhibited even if you're not shy. And I can add another element. When we developed iPod programs in Capgemini, we tend to develop them with both gender. And at some point, because of women at Capgemini, we decided, and the HR communities and the people who were responsible for this decided to have programs with women only. And as the head of Women at Capgemini worldwide, I was invited many times at the reception of the end of the program and the feedback from the women. And either women were ecstatic about having been selected to be in the program from day one, or they originally had a reaction and said, why am I invited to join iPod program with women only? Am I a second-class citizen? And then after a couple of weeks, they felt, wow, it's an experience where you allow yourself to be yourself with no barriers. That has never happened to me before, because in my professional environment, this is almost never happening. And this was a source of resource and growth in this 10 months, 18 months program that I did not estimate at its high value. And now I can confirm that those programs are really important. What does it mean? It means that it comforts the thought that when you put women only in an environment, they let go, they let the barriers go down, and they are themselves fully, and they are totally authentic. So I thought I wanted to discuss those items for you on this question. Maybe I've deviated a bit because, one idea comes to the next, but I think it's really important to reflect on this.
Well, I think I'm totally with you. And you had a number of things in there that I think is worth exploring, because you did mention, right? I think a lot of it is how we were raised, right? We've been around for a few decades now, and you're right. We were told to be, quiet and be agreeable, and don't create a fuss, and that is instilled with us, right? But then also you talked about how we are often the minority, and that makes us feel like we got to go with the mode, right? We don't really we're not comfortable enough to allow our true self to come out. So I guess, Sarah, what are some things that either we can do ourselves, or maybe the company can do to help the women in their organization really feel that comfort and that boldness to bring their true self to the work environment?
There's a word that's been repeated. We'll have to go back and count and see how many times we've used the word confidence just in the short period of time, because I think that's key. There's a reason that word, right, keeps coming up.
Yeah.
It's hard to build confidence in yourself, period, as humans sometimes. But it's really hard to build confidence in yourself if you're in an environment that's actively squashing it. I think I'm probably stating the obvious there. And while I sincerely hope in 2022 that there are fewer company cultures where it's the case that sort of ability to build confidence is being squashed, I fear we do have a ways to go. We can certainly get better and do better. So as for how companies can do our part, I guess, to better encourage or foster authenticity, it comes from the people and the culture, I believe. So it's a cultural issue, not a policy or governance issue. And the reason I bring that up, I love what you said about the GM of CEO making the policy change. And good on her. Like, what an awesome example. And she can do that because she's the CEO. But not everybody's the CEO, women, men, or otherwise, right? And it's a lot easier to change policy than it is to change culture. So certainly from a company perspective, start with the easier stuff. And I say easy, relatively speaking. Look at your policies, look at your governance. Make sure you've obviously done all you can there. But that's phase one. That's check the box phase, as I like to call it. The real impact comes when each individual within the company, from top to bottom, and maybe more importantly from bottom to top, believes that there is space for everyone to be authentic and to be themselves. And that's not an easy task. One of the biggest things I think we can do individually as leaders, so I'm not talking about as CEO or even an executive or certainly or as a board member, but just as a member of a company or particularly as a leader, is to have grace with people. So we all have jobs to do. We all have targets to hit, and we all have moments at work. I have had my fair share. I think that having grace with people in those moments, especially in front of others when you're in a group setting, fosters a culture where people start to believe and to be more comfortable and to feel like they can take a chance and they can be themselves and they're not going to be flogged for it if it lands well or if it doesn't, perhaps. And that takes courage. Having grace actually can take courage depending on the culture of your company. Certainly taking a chance to be yourself does, but it is going to require courage to make real change. Somebody's going to have to be brave, as has been the case with most significant changes, right? And I do think it's important, though, to just sort of something to add. I completely agree with everything Isabelle said with respect to what we mean, though, when we say being authentic. I think it's just as important to say what we don't mean by that. It doesn't mean a complete lack of situational awareness. So Isabelle touched on several instances, right, where she is aware. Doesn't mean that she does or doesn't have to adjust. That's her, professional and personal opinion of when to sort of dial back. I find myself in that situation at times, but it doesn't mean that you lack situational awareness. It's not a hall pass for poor behavior or low emotional intelligence. That's not what we mean by, not what I take it to mean for authenticity. It does mean, speaking your mind and showing up without having to put on an act, I think is probably the way that I boil it down. And a lot of times the first step to that authenticity has a lot less to do with your external environment and more to do with your own confidence that an authentic you really is a better version of you. So until you believe that an authentic you is a better version than perhaps whatever you're emulating or seeing around you, then your environment or the company or the policies and the culture really, that comes second to sort of that innate belief. And that's tough and it takes time. It certainly did for me.
Well, and also I think at one of the events I was just at about a few weeks ago, I was on stage talking about being authentic, and someone in the audience came up to me afterwards, and she's a salesperson. Uh-huh. And I talked about, doing a job, like my example, taking over sales, but doing the job that I knew I wanted the way to do it and be comfortable with, it's okay that I do it different than my predecessor. And her comment was, thank you so much for saying that, because I too am a salesperson and I sell differently than all of my male counterparts, right?
Sure.
And I've been embarrassed. I've been embarrassed to talk about it. I've been embarrassed to say, well, I did this. And by the way, it still worked great, but I was embarrassed to say it because I didn't want to be different. And I think, like you said, you got to have that sense of the way I'm doing it is okay too. And in fact, maybe they'll learn from me.
That's right.
And to have that confidence and that self-assurance to say, different is okay. It doesn't have to be the same.
Yep.
And that needs confidence.
There's a little bit woven in there. Isabelle alluded to this too, I think, of imposter syndrome, which we could probably do an entirely different podcast on and talk for, hours, days, weeks on that. But there's, I think a lot of that woven in as well. And I think with women in particular, I will say this was maybe one of my aha moments, although it didn't happen, in a split second, that being authentic alleviates the pressure of imposter syndrome, because the pressure that comes with imposter syndrome is that you're going to be found out. That's what it is. Someone's going to find out that I'm not good enough to be here, or that I'm not qualified, or that they promoted me too early. But if you're authentic and you're being you and it's getting the job done, it really does alleviate a lot of that pressure. There's nothing to be found out. What you see is essentially what you get. So I think there's probably an element of that also. And good on whoever that woman was for coming up to you and saying that afterward. That's some of the bravery I was talking about that is required.
Yeah.
But the issue as well, if I may say something, is that we have been raised and have worked mainly in male-dominating environments. Now, of course, in some corporations, like L'Oréal and others, you have 60-70% of women. So I'm not talking of those environments, even though in those environments also, you have a problematic of gender equality. But if you are in an environment that was a men's club, they have played the cards with their own games. They have written the rules. So when you come out or you come part of this game, they sort you out as being different. Mm. And it's much easier for them. And it's a natural reaction to say, wow, this is individual. It's like a duck in an environment of a shepherd or whatever it is. You look and sound different. And rather than having the reflex and the intelligence of integration, it's a question of integrating as well. They criticize. And while I agree with Sarah on the fact that authenticity comes from yourself and self-confidence, I'm not 100% aligned on the fact that it has nothing to do or that the environment plays a role, but not that much. I believe that the environment plays a huge role, because even if you are courageous, even if you think that you can be vulnerable and put your mask down, if you are surrounded by another group, a minority, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's gender, or whatever, you feel odd. And I have experienced that in other forms of minorities one day arriving at a party, and I felt really odd. So, and I can speak my words. I think I'm very authentic and was raised with parents that were conducing this to help gain self-confidence. Now, I found a great definition or read something about authenticity that really said there are three elements to it. It requires vulnerability, which means I don't have the fear to show myself as I am, even if it seems that it puts me at a lower level, and I will come back to it. 2, transparency. I say things the way they are. And integrity, because integrity is ethics, and in situations, if you have an authenticity, you shouldn't lie. And I take pride in saying I've crossed my career never lying. I have been stubborn, I've said my words, I've been blunt, whatever, but I never said something that was not the truth. And maybe it was part of my attorneys or my education, my attorneys training, I don't know. But in any case, I take the pride of having been that way. So if you combine the three, it's not easy. And it also goes back to what Sarah said, it's courage. Courage is very difficult. And of course, it's easier to have courage when you are in a group where people abide with your ideas than when you are in a group where they have already written the rules and you are not part of the rules, because in your case, Lois, this woman was acting as a salesperson, but she had her own goodwill, her own way of doing, which differed completely from men. No surprise to me, because we have a different way to present ourselves, to have empathy, to admit certain things that maybe men are raised to be strong and lead and all that. So many times I didn't care of looking weak or not weak. I don't care, because I was myself and I have my own ways of getting there. I have seen meetings which were so toxic because regardless, you were being criticized, you were attacked, and there is no good momentum if you don't create a synergy between people so that they build and so that they operate together. And I have seen managers who think that by organizing and orchestrating a fight between people to see which one would prevail, you manage well. And I think this is absolutely wrong. But as a woman, you tend to know these things in your team. You have also experience from families, from the way I felt that raising kids is extremely helpful when you have a team to manage, because it's difficult to raise kids and it helps you understand the interaction with individuals, and you don't manipulate people. You have to take what comes, and they have different personalities. So I think all of those elements are very complex, because it's where you were born and raised, what your parents told you, how the education was, the company you were in. And I will have a few, I'd like to switch the floor to Sarah and yourself also, but on a few other points, there are a few recommendations that I would like to give that if I knew earlier would have probably changed destiny. You know, this is a very interesting topic that you chose because it's complex and it's the individual, him or herself, but it's also the environment that puts pressure and the rules that created and built that environment for decades or for centuries, I should say.
Well, and I guess that's what maybe a last question for both of you to that point. If both of you could just offer for if there's someone listening who maybe is in a situation where they don't feel like they can be free to really bring their true self forward, just a few comments on what should they do.
You know, it's easy for me to say, sitting in my position, go somewhere different. And I think that's probably a cop-out and an easy answer for people out there who are trying to make a living and have mouths to feed and families to take care of. Certainly, if you would have told me earlier in my career when I was in positions and working for companies maybe where I wasn't my authentic self and I wasn't especially comfortable, if your advice would have been just go somewhere else, it would have been not especially helpful. Having said that, once you get to the point that you do, I think, have that belief that your true and your authentic self is a better version of yourself, we don't all necessarily have the power, or to be honest, the energy, depending on where you are in your life, to be the one who's going to change the culture of their company. So I think that's a lot to put on women, men, or anybody else, especially if you're younger in your career. So I would say if you really and truly are in a toxic environment, I think Isabelle's probably got a queued up list for us that I'm going to be taking notes during on how to, sort of approach that and be more authentic. I do think that you have to be comfortable and build up the courage to say, maybe going somewhere else. It might be a lateral move, to change cultures. I do think there's one other important thing before we close out, though. Isabelle said something at the end there that struck me. She used the word personality. And I think that a lot of times, particularly when we're focused on advocating for women and our authenticity, the ones who are advocating are the ones who are very strong and direct. Dare I say, Isabelle is a prime example of that. And thank God for the women who are strong and direct, right? Because they have the voices and they're willing to use them and they speak up. But I do think that we have to remember also that part of giving people the space to be their authentic selves is not everybody is direct or has a loud voice, as I myself have been accused and complimented somehow of having a loud voice and being direct. And so I think it's equally important as leaders to be on the lookout for, that's kind of the whole point, right? Is to have a safe enough space for people to say, you may not be the loudest voice in the room, but it doesn't mean that you're not the smartest mind. And so it's incumbent on us to make sure that you don't have to speak, the same way I do, I'll put it that way, in order to have a seat at the table and to be heard, or at least I would hope it wouldn't have to be that way. And I do think that authenticity is not a hall pass for poor behavior. If you are authentically a jerk, I don't believe that it is incumbent on the rest of us to tolerate or accommodate that in the name of your authenticity.
Yes.
So being humans is complex, and it's the hardest part of this job, I will say, of any job, I believe. The technical stuff, the digital transformations, all the other stuff we do, while it's challenging and it's hard, it's easy compared to getting this stuff right, but this is the stuff that matters. So I do believe that the energy and the time that we spend in these discussions, I mean, to say it's well spent would be, an understatement. I have many times, I'll just end with this, I've many times in my career been on the receiving end of going too far with my authenticity. I do believe that there's a point where you can go too far with your authenticity. I am told that I'm direct, although next time I'm told that, I'm going to introduce him to Isabelle and say, I'll show you direct. I'm probably demure and muted because I'm not the French version, Isabelle, which I absolutely love and admire about you. And I'm told that, right? And people love it. And I'll meet people for the first time and I'll get a follow-up email that says, oh, it was such a pleasure. Thank you for your transparency and your directness. So people love it until they don't, because there's another side to that coin. And I'll tell you another thing that is my authentic self. I never, ever, ever want to or desire to embarrass somebody or to make somebody feel bad. But I will tell you, there have been multiple times in my career when I inadvertently have embarrassed or made somebody feel bad because of my directness, which is not my intent. So my point in saying that is it's complex. It's not black or white. It's not an on or off switch. It is not a hall pass to just behave however we feel without consideration for others in any given moment. There is an emotional intelligence, that sort of balances what is a very complex conversation, but I certainly think it's worth having. And now I'm going to get my pen and paper out because I'm seriously interested in Isabelle's list because I feel sure there's going to be stuff I need to employ.
Oh, please. I have a lot to learn from you. In any case, I feel that your personality and mine match quite a bit. To my credit, I would say, when you're a litigator in the shipping industry in the 80s, in the States, and you cross the Atlantic on a cargo vessel as the only woman, either you're strong or you die, It's swim or die. So I'm sure
Amen.
that my litigator's experience has developed in me certain directness, which probably I had already in herb and which I don't necessarily desire, because what you said is very true. You need to leave the space also to those who have different personalities and are more quiet, are more shy, and let them blossom in their own way and not be overwhelming. And the personality that Sarah and myself has seems to be strong enough that it could be perceived by those people as overwhelming. And sometimes, because you are blunt, you are direct and authentic, you can hurt others without being willing to do so. So that's an issue. To go back to your question, which is a very difficult one, to say what to say to someone who's in an impasse and don't think that they can open up, you have no right answer. It also depends on the environment, because it depends. Any action brings a reaction, and you cannot act the same depending on who is facing you. And if people have emotional intelligence and can redress or understand why they hurt you, or why as an individual you cannot speak up, it's okay. But if the person will never be that way and is an authentic jerk, as Sarah said, you bite your tongue and you stop there, and you actually do things outside of the office that allow you to let the pressure go, because you don't want to contract a stomach ache, a cancer, or whatever. And letting go the pressure is really, really important. And when you don't have it and cannot speak your words and cannot be your authentic self, which in certain environments you cannot be, then try to find other ways to let the pressure go, not to fall sick, because that will happen otherwise. But then reflect on how could I eventually opt out and find another job. But no, not everybody has the luxury to find jobs easily. There are moments with crisis and no crisis where you can find a job or not. But if you can, there are a couple of things that I think you should do to go to the next job and not fall in the trap. One thing that no one ever told me, because I almost never looked for a job. I had 3 jobs in an entire career of 40 plus years. And for some reason, except the first one, maybe, which I searched a bit, going out of my US program and French attorney's qualification. But in the other instances, it was an opportunity, and I responded to the opportunity, and I was selected. This is a big mistake that I will tell everybody, because in today's market, especially in the service industry, we want resources, and they select you, and you have to go through 1, 2, 3, 10 interviews. Sorry, I have to select my employer. And this I was never told. And frankly, serendipity or not, but I was always brought to the most masculine industries. The shipping industries in the 80s with no women. M&A in American law firms starting at the end of the 80s and the 90s was often the only women. And clients who were demanding the advice were only men. So only men, no women. And then joining one of the most masculine environment in the CAC 40, of course. And I loved Capgemini. I had a very interesting career, difficult, but very interesting, where you had engineers, and engineers are men. In engineering schools, at most you have 20% women, and IBM and Accenture have recruited so many of the women that in Capgemini we had less anyway. So very masculine. I never was told, you choose your employer. There is no obligation to accept a job unless you need to feed your family or in a difficult situation. You choose your employer, aligned, listen, teams, to your values. Because if you want to be authentic, you have to live up to your values. You have to tone down if you have the personality that Sarah and myself show tonight. You have to show empathy, which I have a lot, which is probably why I'm so coming across strong, because I also protect myself from emotions and empathy that I have a million. But you choose your employers aligned with your values, and possibly choose your boss, but possibly as a limitation. When I jumped Capgemini, after 1 or 2 interviews, I knew I wanted this job. I fell in love with this man. And of course, let me rectify. This was a man at the end of his career. He left a year after he selected me as the group general counsel, But I had a clicking of the mind. I was inspired. I knew I could work for someone I would respect, that would bring me something, and that therefore I could deploy maximum energy and results. So you choose first the company, because the company doesn't change, but your direct boss will change. And in my 23 years at Capgemini, I had 7 or 8 bosses, and I had disparity of situations. So you have to adjust. So at least you enter in a corporation where the values are there, where the respect is there, where the CEOs is sending down messages that are cascaded, where fun, authenticity, we had that in Capgemini, boldness, all those values that are important to you. And my values can be different than yours, but select your employer. And when you are interviewed with who becomes your first job, your first boss, make sure that, of course, you're aligned with that person. And this, no one needs my advice to say that, because nobody takes a job with a person that is going to be your boss where you don't feel a good relationship can be installed. I want to say also, take some pauses to reflect. A general counsel friend of mine told me, which I never did in the same fashion, but it's a good recipe. She told me, I put in my agenda every month, and if not every quarter, a meeting with myself. And I keep in my agenda 1 hour, 2 hours, meeting with myself, where I reflect about what have I accomplished for the company, for myself, for my family, for whatever, in the last months, in the last quarter, what went well, what went wrong, and was it my authentic self, or did I have to twist and create a stomach ache to get there? And I go back to what Sarah said when you did your opening. I said, wow, Sarah speaks my words. I felt that it's so much more energy. If you speak to people that don't believe in what we say, there is one thing that you will believe is efficiency and performance, because this is what you want in your career. You want efficiency, performance, that everything goes well. It takes so much more energy to fake it and to pretend you are an individual that you aren't. And you would be very surprised that if you show yourself taking the mask down, showing your emotions, being natural and moved by situations, that people will have empathy, sympathy, and confidence in you, because they trust that you are not someone that is fake. You are in real flesh and bones. If ever you cry in the office, which has happened to me, I tell you, I don't care, because there are situations where you have emotions and there is nothing wrong with this. Nothing wrong. And a number of times in meetings I've heard, oh, you're too emotional. I have heard that I don't know how many times. And I felt, my God, I am so glad to have emotions, because I can understand others. I can feel momentum. I have intuition. Maybe I'm overwhelming at times, but at least I have that. It's part of my package. And I think people respect me for that as well, for showing that I am a human being. I'm the boss maybe of a launch team, but I have emotions and I have weaknesses like everybody else. And when you're authentic, you are not in fear of vulnerability, and you show yourself the way you are. And that incarnates you even more. And people are inspired. In my career, I have listened so many times in the last decade. I'm so inspired, because I'm a normal person. I have my weaknesses. I have my difficulties. I can cry. I can have emotions. There's nothing wrong. Thank you. So I think you select your employer, you organize meeting with yourself, and you reflect on your experiences. And last but not least, you share with others. Talking to your friends, talking to your family, talking to your body, your spouse. And if you are in women environments, and I go back to this group of iPod programs with women only, they said, we learn so much more, because if we had been with men, we would have had a reserve. And now that we had once in our life an 18 months program on top of our job with women only, we gained the confidence. And now we think we're ready and strong, and we have less inhibition, and we feel comfortable, and we can be ourselves much better. And so when you are not in those programs and you share with women environments, with clubs of women, men are very good at clubs. are going for a beer, at meeting their buddies. We are not so good for that. And we find a dozen excuses that they have the kids, we have to go back, we have to take care of this and that. You know what? I've done this plus that in my life, and I never regret it. And I would say to the women, have no inhibitions, and also know that there are periods in your life when you can do more, periods when you can do less, and there is nothing wrong. You have cycles. There are moments where you can invest more, your time externally in networking. But networking, I put in my general counsel's objectives, a KPI, a key performance indicator for performance for their remuneration, to be part of a network and tell me what it is, of lawyers, of specialties in an industry, because in those networks you speak up, you are yourself in a different fashion, you create connections, and you learn how to blossom. And I put a network with an external target, especially to help people get out of themselves and blossom in order to be better and bring back more into the corporation. So with that, I would say nothing more than be you. And I regret to say that if I had been on the video, I wanted to show a T-shirt I had acquired in Vietnam years ago when traveling, because I love the message. That was navy blue with white letters saying be you. So ladies, if this is ladies only, or ladies and gentlemen, be you. And don't forget that what you don't ask, you don't get most of the time. So never forget to ask. And this is part of your authenticity. With that were my tips of a few years of career and a lot of passion for people and for life.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, both of you. I am so glad we recorded this, because there was so much that we got to talk about, so much to learn from. We get to listen to it again. So thank you. And appreciate your candor, your heartfelt transparency, and your authenticity today on this podcast. So thank you so much, Sarah and Isabelle, for joining us, and so excited to talk to you both. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invite. It was a pleasure.
Yes, thank you for the invite. And the selection could not have been better. I had a lot of vibration, positive ones coming out of what Sarah said, and it was really great. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And it feels that I'm alive, when I speak about those topics. And when you retire, you're in a different environment. And right now, I have not had the opportunity to switch to another job or do something very different. And I like the idea of participating to those things and sharing experience, if this can help a bit anybody. So
yeah,
that was a real pleasure. And thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much.
Oh, man. That was some interview, Lois.
Well, I'm glad you liked it. I know. Aren't they great?
Oh, they are so great. First of all, I want to introduce, we have Liliana Alonso joining us. Missy couldn't make it, so Lily was the MC for the Women in Digital Award. So, Lily, say hi to our audience.
Thanks, Ini. Hello, everyone, and thanks for the invite.
Yeah. So, I feel like Isabelle really gave us a history lesson. I mean, bam, we got the full history. And actually, I've listened to the rough edit twice, and I feel like I could go back and listen to it another time. So just so you know, anybody listening, don't hesitate to go back and listen to it again, because I really think it's important. But some of the things that I thought were really interesting, and I'm sort of pulling these out in order, was one is the environment and culture. Both Sarah and Isabelle talked about the environment that you're in and how women react. Like I thought really women are perfectionists, but I also think that ties into the expectations women have for not only themselves but culturally, and it's different from culture to culture. So, and Lily, what you said, you were thinking about that too.
Yeah, I mean the part that Sarah mentioned about how women feel comfortable depending on the environment, it was like, oh my God, it hit me, because it's true. Like if you are surrounded with the people that like support you and everything, you feel comfortable to be just authentic and be yourself. And when you are surrounded with people that you are not comfortable or you are not used to them, sometimes you don't know as a woman how to react. So I think that's a really key point. And another thing is the cultural part of it.
Yeah.
And considering we interact with from people from different countries and from a different country, I was just like, oh my God, it's so true. It depends a lot on where you are at. And it reminded me, Luis, when we were back in Mexico with some clients, like even you made me some comments about how different it is from the US and Mexico, right? And even remember I told Luis some comments about, well, yeah, in Mexico, when they say yes, it's not 100% true. Like different from the US. When people say yes, it's yes here.
It is so true. And it's
true.
And it made me think about even myself, if I'm sitting in a room with women, no matter what level of the organization, I feel much more conversational. I feel more at ease and so forth. When you get into a room that has many more men than women, or to your point, people who are from a different country, you're just a little bit more on guard. You have to work harder. You have to think harder. And I'm sure that has a little bit of an impact on us and our sense of, do I feel comfortable to say something?
Yeah, I was thinking about this as I would listen to it the second time. Sarah pointed out the awareness of your environment. But I was also thinking it's because as women, we do a self-inventory on our actions. We go back over it and say, what did I do? Maybe, because Sarah was saying how she inadvertently maybe offended somebody, but I'm thinking we always do that. We do this self-inventory. And I think that's important to build that empathy that we bring to the table and think about, oh, did I hurt someone? Did I say something wrong? Let me go back and learn it.
Yeah, and I think that's also related of what Sarah mentioned about, like, we are perfectionists, right? We are always like trying to see like what I say is correct, like always like hesitant about our own self-confidence. And that, of course, affect all the conversation or situation you are in. Even no matter how much like in your mind you are confident about it, sometimes it's just like that, this perfectionism and like always we asking or questioning ourselves then affect the rest.
Yeah. But, the other thing is, the one thing I forget, so we not only are we taught to be nice, the second part was having the grace to allow others to be themselves. I think that's a Sarah point. But it's also having the grace to allow you to be yourself. And I think that gets us into the next point that I was thinking about, is how brave it is to be authentic. I really feel like, and I think Isabelle also mentioned the fact there's a maturity. Isabelle talked a lot of great stuff, but a maturity, being an environment where you kind of go, all right, I'm just going to say it. I'm just going to say it. Hello, that's me. This is like my... So I really, though, thought that was really right on the nose. Let's give everybody the space and grace to be themselves. But let's also give ourselves that space.
Absolutely. And I think, what sort of really spoke to me as they were talking, I think we can reflect so much on ourselves of where we've been in scenarios where you felt you had to work a little bit hard to be yourself, and you had to figure out, like, what should I do to really give myself that extra oomph, right? That extra courage. And, I don't matter what, how old we are, how many years we've been working. I just thought that they had such an amazing set of just really great ideas. I love the idea when Isabelle was talking about interviewing the person, like interviewing the job, like not just have them interview us, but we are interviewing what we want to do. I thought that was really insightful. And I wish I knew that 20 years ago. Right?
Oh, yeah. I think you're right. And that was the last piece. Like, I think about women, we don't get headhunted as much. I think about, all the guys I know at my level or have got the same education. All the men got hired right out of grad school, but nobody's like, as a woman, And I really think it's something we have to think about and change, but not that I want to move on. But I think it's important to realize that could be an advantage for us. We can go pick our own jobs. We can go select the people we want to work for. And I think that could be a superpower. I don't know. I like superpower ideas. Lily?
Yeah, I totally agree. And also the part that both mentioned, like, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's part of being authentic, being vulnerable, like just like showing for yourself. Say when you don't, like, you are not in agreement with something that doesn't, like, has to be a thing that would, like, sometimes we are just afraid to say what we think because we are afraid to lose our job, or like it's inappropriate or something. And as Sarah mentioned, knowing the way on how to do things depending on your environment or culturally. I mean, also Isabelle mentioned different, like, depending on France or Germany, how you say the words, right? But it's not about being different. It's just like adapting the words per your environment.
Yeah. And I have to say, there's two other comments I have to say about this, and then I'm going to back and listen to it again. And but one, authentic jerk sounds really good with a French accent. That's just, I'm going to say that. The way Isabelle says that, it's like, I got to learn how to say that right. So that's number one. And then the number two is, I feel like what we were all coming back and saying is, like, when you walk into a room and you feel awkward, I call it fake it till you make it, baby. Go out there and just be you and just kind of push through. Sometimes that's just the way to go. Those are my parting thoughts. You guys get to say your parting thoughts.
I mean, I love the part of when they said, be brave to be authentic and have courage, and also surround yourself, or people in the company should also have the courage enough to let you to be authentic.
Yep. Lois, you get the last word.
I want to just say another big thank you to both of them for joining us, for both Sarah and Isabelle. And thanks to you guys for also just a little chat afterwards to just, what it meant for each of us, because I think there's just some great messages that they had in there. So
I agree.
I'm excited. Can't wait for this to hit the airwaves.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lily, for joining us and being a co-host. Now we have a backup to Missy. Oh, okay. You're not my new backup.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you like our podcast, please subscribe and rate and review us. Thank you.